I was a lifelong atheist before I became Catholic. And when people hear that I chose to join the Roman Catholic Church, they're like, why? And that's just the Catholics. I used to have all of these stereotypes that Catholics curse and they drink and they're irresponsible with family planning. And now I am those stereotypes. So are you guys, evidently. You know, the culture around us sometimes doesn't like Catholicism. You know when they realize they need us? When their houses are haunted.
Good morning. It's Saturday, Enemies of My Country Saturday, December the 23rd, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity prayer and the patriotic song of the day, we will have no free lunch, rules for radical conservatives, rules for retrogrades, rules for patriots, Bishop Barron, Ayn Rand, and the enemies of my country. All that and more, much, much more, when I get back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I shouldn't change, the courage to change the things I should, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. Thank you. And now there's no free lunch. 250 Economic Truths by David Bahnsen.
It is good luck to be born in America. The luck consists chiefly of a modern liberal ideology of innovism combined with reasonably honest courts and reasonably secure property rights and reasonably non-extractive governments and reasonably effective educational systems and a reasonably long time for the reasonably good ideas, and especially the innovations, to do their work. By all means, let's spread the good luck around by persuading people to a modern liberalism leading to the great enrichment and a full life. Deirdre N. McCloskey. Rather than bemoan those who had the good fortune to be born in a country that has made the necessary decisions to cultivate human flourishing, let us seek to spread the formula around. We ought to study and understand what has created such wealth in America, seek more of the same domestically, and share the secret sauce with the world at large. We are embracing in the modern context a shame or embarrassment for our good fortunes. Care for mankind would demand that we do the opposite. Present with pride a belief in innovation, freedom, and the good life.
And that was There's No Free Lunch by David Bahnsen. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, rules for radical conservatives.
See how easy it is. This simple principle enables us to invalidate any aspect of your culture at any time we choose. Your country, the one we're fundamentally changing in case you hadn't noticed, is an almost laughable target-rich environment, which is why we are incapable of being appeased. We will not stop, we will not falter, and we will not fail until we have brought the America of Jefferson and Jackson to its knees, forced it to confess its original sins, and then blow its brains out. Our side, on the other hand, believes in personal truths. Our long march has found a natural terminus in the grooves of academe, where we have diligently labored to remove cultural certainties, to deconstruct cultural norms, separate the text itself from its plain meaning. With Foucault and Derrida as our models, and applying the principles of Fromm and Adorno, we have managed to render multiple generations of college students incapable of reading The Night Before Christmas without applying critical theory to it, turning it into gibberish and their brains into contortionate mush. Did I mention that judgmental is the dirtiest word in our vocabulary? I like to call what we're doing the elevation of the singular to the universal. As is our wont, we have turned normal logical thought processes upside down, opting for the counterintuitive and then trying to sell it to you as normative. A weird sort of perversion of Christian theology. It goes like this. To avoid the tyranny of the majority, even though majority rule is the bedrock of the political process, we must have instead the tyranny of the minority. The existence of one exception to the norm invalidates the norm. The exception, in other words, not only proves the rule, it becomes the rule. Consider something non-controversial. Oh, let's say abortion. By positing the merest existence of wire coat hangers and back alley scrapers at any time in our past, we have automatically arrived at one of the arguments for legalized abortion, since even one death at the hands of these social outlaws is unconscionable, and in our fertile imaginations, there is not merely one such provider lurking in the shadows, but an army of them, ready to emerge at the stroke of a pen, to wreak their depredations upon the legions of women who are the daily victims of rape and incest. Or, if abortion is not controversial enough for you, let's try race, always one of our favorites. You're not going to like what I'm about to say here, and in fact, I think it may be a tad politically incorrect myself. But since this, as Barbara Bush said to Katie, or Bobwa, or Oprah, or somebody, is just between friends, let's talk about race. The civil rights movement was, for the men and women of Che's generation, the be-all and end-all of their existence, their alpha and their omega. It was the case they committed their young lives to, as lawyers, journalists, poll workers, you name it. It was a great moral moment whose time had come. And so what if the bad guys in the South were, can you believe it, Southern Democrats? Not to mention recalcitrant Democrats in certain precincts up north, in Boston and elsewhere, but they'd have to wait their turn. You might have thought that since we're Democrats ourselves, that might have been an obstacle to our seizing the moral high ground on this issue. But we had gone to school on the HUAC hearings and the Hollywood blacklist, and we realized that it was but a simple matter, a mere judo flip, to pin the tail not on the donkey, but on the elephant. So we turned Bull Connor and his gang into premature Republicans, along the line of my grandfather's generation's premature anti-fascists, rewrote the history books as needed, and went on our merry way. We had to go to the mat on the civil rights issue, which meant we had to eliminate anybody or anything that got in our way, because we saw, as others didn't, how important it was. Not because it was the right and moral thing to do, not because it forced America to live up to her highest ideals. Hell, we all agreed on that. Because it was the wedge that would allow us to destroy every other institution in the country. I know this is going to be hard for you to accept, even those of you on my side, but bear with me. You see, in their own revanchist, racist way, those demonized Southern Democrats, senators like Robert KKK Byrd and Albert Arnold Gore Sr., father of Albert Arnold Gore Jr., and grandfather of Albert Arnold Gore III, the Hillbilly Dynasty, and Sleepin' Sammy Irvin, actually had a point about states' rights, otherwise known as that pesky 10th Amendment. Although they were wrong on the particulars, they were right on the general principles, which was that once you start undermining the bedrock foundations of the country, once you undermine only one, then there's no stopping you. Excuse me, I mean us. From that moment on, everything is on the table, and any opposition, no matter how principled, can be dismissed by comparing it to opposition to the civil rights movement. A movement that had begun to rectify the specific original sin of the Constitution. The 3/5 compromise, without which there never would have been a Constitution, and all that flowed from it, from the Missouri Compromise to the Dred Scott decision to the Civil War itself, could be co-opted and transformed into a weapon against the nation itself. Gay marriage, just like the civil rights movement. Universal health care, just like the civil rights movement. Cap and trade, just like the civil rights movement. Illegal immigration, just like the civil rights movement. Women in combat, just like the civil rights movement. The Real Housewives of Beverly Hills, just like the civil rights movement. Okay, just kidding about that last one. Everybody knows there are no real housewives in Beverly Hills. Still, you see how easy that was? And race was the key to it all. It was the heart plug of the Harkonnens and Dune, the chain we could always yank, because no matter how much racial progress was made, it was always yankable. And all we ever had to do was simply point to the Constitution, your original sin, and defy you to live up to all its implications, penumbras, emanations, and effervescences.
And that was the next part of Chapter 14 from Rules for Radical Conservatives by David Kahane. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Rules for Retrogrades, 40 Tactics to Defeat the Radical Left.
Rule 24. When a rival or overlord like Alexander the Great comes to visit you, offering gifts, be the philosopher Diogenes the Cynic. Tell the radical mob or despot that you want nothing from them except that they stand out of your light. In a rule above, the retrograde exemplar was Alexander. In this case, the exemplar is his adversary, Diogenes, who scornfully rebuffed the great ruler. Consider Plutarch's account of the strange encounter between two of the most dissimilar great men in history. Thereupon, many statesmen and philosophers came to Alexander with their congratulations, and he expected that Diogenes of Sinope also, who was tarrying in Corinth, would do likewise. But since that philosopher took not the slightest notice of Alexander, and continued to enjoy his leisure in the suburb Cranion, Alexander went in person to see him, and he found him lying in the sun. Diogenes raised himself up a little when he saw so many people coming towards him, and fixed his eyes upon Alexander. And when that monarch addressed him with greetings, and asked if he wanted anything, "Yes," said Diogenes, "stand a little out of my sun." It is said that Alexander was so struck by this, and admired so much the haughtiness and grandeur of the man, who had nothing but scorn for him, that he said to his followers, who were laughing and jesting about the philosopher as they went away, "But truly, if I were not Alexander, I wish I were Diogenes." And Diogenes replied, "If I wasn't Diogenes, I would be wishing to be Diogenes, too. Here's the moral of the story. Never accept a gift or a nicety from an opponent, much less from the social justice mob. Never embrace an entitlement, bread or circuses, offered by Machiavellian politicians. Bread and circuses prove to be the wage by which radicals purchase their ill-gotten office and by which the individual is parted from his liberty. Acceptance of economic favors from radicals puts one into their debt and robs the goodly man of his honor and self-possession. In other words, be magnanimous, offering aid to all in your path, but accepting it only from the most trusted friends, even then, only with great hesitation. Once in a great while, one meets a radical not completely inoculated against the winsome allure of extemporaneous Christian virtue. Do not hold your breath, but you may just convert a radical through your example of magnanimity. Aristotle defines the virtue of magnanimity in the following terms. The great-souled, magnanimous man is fond of conferring benefits, but ashamed to receive them, because the former is a mark of superiority and the latter of inferiority. He continues down the page. It is also characteristic of the great-souled man never to ask help from others, or only with reluctance, but to render aid willingly, and to be haughty towards men of position and fortune, but courteous towards those of moderate station, because it is difficult and distinguished to be superior to the great, but easy to outdo the lowly. It is like putting forth one's strength against the weak. In these short lines, Aristotle explains why the magnanimous Diogenes would rebuff a man so admirable as Alexander, because he alone was worthy of a challenge. He alone was worthy of Diogenes' haughtiness. The retrograde must reclaim classical magnanimity for himself and for his people. He must learn to emulate both the great-souled man's virtue and his contempt for the mob. Aristotle closes by mocking pretenders to magnanimity who merely imitate the great-souled man without being really like him, only copying him in what they can, reproducing his contempt for others, but not his virtuous conduct. For the great-souled man is justified in despising vicious people. His estimates are correct, but most proud men have no good ground for their pride. Retrogrades, be restored to magnanimity, reclaiming righteous contempt for vicious men, but first reclaim virtue. Remain unattached and unindebted to the mob.
And that was Rule 24 from Rules for Retrogrades, 40 Tactics to Defeat the Radical Left. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Rules for Patriots by Steve Deese.
Chapter 3, Commandment number 2, never attack what you're not willing to kill. If you're going to win in politics, you have to know what politics actually is. Most of us believe politics is simply how we advance public policy in America, or cynically define it the way Obi-Wan Kenobi once defined the Mos Eisley spaceport in the original Star Wars. You will never find a more wretched hive of scum and villainy. Now, those may be examples of what politics does or what politics becomes, but that's not what politics is. Politics is primarily two things. First, politics is faith and ethics in action. A study done by a University of Virginia psychologist said Americans today are the most politically polarized we've been in our history. And the primary reason for the polarization is a difference in morality. But what determines our morality? Our faith and our ethics. We are all, whether we prefer to recognize it or not, created in the image of the living God. From that common origin comes similarities in our design despite differing ancestries. For instance, all human beings, unless they've had a complete psychological break and become psychopaths, work through the same philosophical paradigm when making any moral decision. It begins with a faith/authority statement. In other words, the first thing we process is who or what we believe we are ultimately accountable to at this time, and or the most in need of pleasing. That determination will dictate a belief system, whereas we create an ideology to satisfy the faith/authority statement. That belief system will determine our convictions, i.e., behaviors, emotions, responses, thoughts, etc., which are the actions we take in order to please and or honor who or what we originally decided we either needed to please and or be held accountable to. This is why people say things like actions speak louder than words, because how you act is what demonstrates to people whom or what you ultimately serve. A famous line in the Bible puts it thusly: "Show me your faith apart from your works, and I will show you my faith by my works." When asked by his followers, how will we know who is and isn't really one of us? Jesus didn't say, by their ability to clearly and consistently articulate a systematic theology you will know them. No. Rather, Jesus said, by their fruit you will know them. The fruit in question here is the kind that blossoms after a seed has been planted, grown deep roots, and then becomes a fully developed tree or crop. Now, someone may claim rather convincingly they intend to have an apple orchard. But if they plant a bunch of oranges instead, they end up with a grove. Likewise, someone can claim to be a conservative, a Christian, a constitutionalist, loving father, husband, etc., all they want. But for others to believe that is true means there needs to be fruit or works that are indicative of what is expected from someone claiming to be any or all of those things. This is why politicians who try to have it both ways, by saying things like, I'm personally pro-life, but I can't impose my private religious beliefs on others, are lying, phony hypocrites at best, or schizophrenics at worst. If someone really believed that all human life comes from the Creator and is therefore sacred, they would do everything within their grasp to defend it, short of succumbing to the tactics that make them exactly like what they claim to be against. Men, imagine if you came home and told your wife you were, quote, personally pro-faithfulness, but you can't impose your private religious beliefs on other women who might be attracted to you. The next call you'd need to make would either be your lawyer or a Kevlar distributor. So let's apply this philosophical paradigm to politics. When a politician or candidate is faced with a moral dilemma, the first thing he/she will do is determine who or what am I ultimately accountable to. This is a faith, or sometimes lack thereof, statement. Am I ultimately accountable to my sworn oath of office? When I said, so help me God, who is that God? And what does he, she, it demand of me? Is it my own conscience I'm accountable to? Well, what informs my conscience, and how do I know it should? Is it my constituents? Do I do what my constituents want me to do, even if I think it is wrong? If there's a conflict between my conscience and the desires of my constituents, how do I decide which comes first, and how do I know which is right? Do I please the voters at all costs? Is it the Constitution? How do I know my interpretation of the Constitution is correct? Then, how do I know the standard I chose to determine my interpretation of the Constitution is the right one? Is it popular opinion like polls or the media pundits? However he or she answers these questions will determine the belief system they will program into their subconscious to begin carrying out whatever eventual convictions, or lack thereof, they believe will get the approval of whom or what they're most trying to please. So from now on, when you hear a politician or candidate say they can separate their private religious beliefs from their public governance, realize that's because their private religious beliefs are really either non-existent or a steaming pile of horse pucky. Otherwise, they'd be driving their public convictions. What they act upon is what they really believe, because what they really believe is what drives them to do whatever it is they do or don't. And that's the same for you, me, your spouse, your children, your parents, your friends, and your boss, and for every other created being in all walks of life everywhere and at all times, unless they've suffered some sort of psychotic break. Along the same lines, many of our politicians/candidates fall into the trap of, will I do something, as opposed to asking themselves, can I do something? Human nature is not basically good. Therefore, when we rely on our will, we are playing Russian roulette with our ethics. For example, suppose I am locked in a room with an attractive, naked, and willing woman. At first, I may not succumb to the temptation, But the more and more I ask myself, will I cheat on my wife in this sort of situation, the more likely I eventually will. Many of the people we elect are facing a similar and daily den of iniquity once they're in public office. And the more they rely on their own will, the more their resolve will wear down, and they will compromise, rationalize, or just surrender. However, if I put myself in that same situation with that same attractive, naked, and willing woman, but then ask myself, can I cheat on my wife instead? Now the entire conversation within my conscience has changed. Because can is a word that denotes permission. Do I have permission to disappoint my children in such a way? Do I have permission to betray my wife and everyone that counts on me? Do I have permission to break God's commandment against adultery? Think I'm naive? Think again. How many times have you gotten angry at a fellow driver's incompetence or rudeness on the road and thought about running him down and letting him have it? So why don't you do it? Because your conscience pricks you by asking you, can you do that? That compels you to then count the cost of this action. You could put others in the car with you that care about you in danger. You could make yourself late for wherever you have to go next. You could do something that will cause you to be arrested and go to jail. In other words, by asking yourself, can I run this guy down? You have begun considering the consequences of your actions. If you ask yourself, will I run this guy down? You begin considering all the ways you would like to, thus feeding the desires of your fallen base nature and increasing the likelihood you will do some dangerous and or dumb things. Imagine if our politicians asked themselves, can I violate my oath of office, as opposed to, will I violate my oath of office? Or can I go back on my word, as opposed to, will I go back on my word? Many times I have been asked to do things that compromise my integrity. And sometimes these are things I would like to do if it were up to me alone. But it's not. I am eternally accountable to my Creator, who redeemed me at the high cost of his own Son. I am accountable to my wife, whom I made a lifelong commitment to. I am accountable to my children, who need me to set a good example for them at the risk of making a mistake that could cost the generations that follow. I am accountable to my employees and business partners who are banking on my integrity as part of my on-air persona. I am accountable to my audience who needs to trust that what they're hearing coming over the radio each broadcast day is sincere. Thus, when these temptations come my way, I respond, I can't do it, and not, I won't do it. It's nothing personal. You're just asking me to do something I can't do. I have a defined boundary here, and I can no more violate that boundary than I can violate the boundary in my neighbor's yard and start treating it as my own. This is why I will often ask those running for office, what can't you do? The 10 Commandments God gave to Moses mainly consist of statements telling us what not to do. Thus, if we're going to honor the oath we swear to that same God, we ought to have a pretty good idea of what we can't do as well. Now that we've established the why and how, politics is first and foremost faith and ethics in action, let's move on to the second thing politics is, how we conduct civil war in this country. When we, conservatives, Christians, constitutionalists, libertarians, all those that make up the right of center coalition in this country, view politics as a simple debate over public policy and not how we conduct civil war in this country, we will lose every time.
And that was the beginning of Chapter 5 from Rules for Patriots, How Conservatives Can Win Again by Steve Deese. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Bishop Robert Barron.
What do you hunger and thirst for? I'm hungry and thirsty for success, for power, for bodily pleasure. You'll be happy if you hunger and thirst for one thing, righteousness. That means doing the will of God. Again, think about this now. When you get out of bed in the morning, ask yourself that question. What do you want? If you're super honest, you'll uncover some of these attachments. Well, deep down, what I want is to be a big worldly success. What I want deep down through all these things is for everybody to like me. Okay, that's the way we sinners think. You want to be holy, happy, hunger and thirst for righteousness. What if you went through your day now? Think about this. With every decision, what do I want? Do I want to do the right thing? Do I want to follow God's will? Do I want to follow the path of love or something else? Because there's only one thing that your life should be about. If you're divided in heart, you're not going to walk this path.
And that was Bishop Robert Barron. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now the Ayn Rand thought of the day. Quote, if capitalism had never existed, any honest humanitarian should have been struggling to invent it. But when you see men struggling to evade its existence, to misrepresent its nature, and to destroy its last remnants, you may be sure that whatever their motives, love for man is not one of them. Unquote. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, the 33 strategies of war.
Compared to sports like football, baseball is slow and has few outlets for aggression. This was a problem for the hitter Ted Williams, who played best when he was angry, when he felt that it was him against the world. Creating this mood on the field was difficult for Williams, but early on he discovered a secret weapon: the press. He got into the habit of insulting sports writers, whether just by refusing to cooperate with them or by verbally abusing them. The reporters returned the favor, writing scathing articles on his character, questioning his talent, trumpeting the slightest drop in his batting average. It was when Williams was hammered by the press, though, that he played best. He would go on a hitting tear as if to prove them wrong. In 1957, when he carried on a year-long feud with the papers, he played perhaps his greatest season and won the batting title at what for a baseball player is the advanced age of 40. As one journalist wrote, hate seems to activate his reflexes like adrenaline stimulates the heart. Animosity is his fuel. For Williams, the animosity of the press, and with the press of the public, was a kind of constant pressure that he could read, hear, and feel. They hated him. They doubted him. They wanted to see him fail. He would show them. And he did. A fighting spirit needs a little edge, some anger and hatred to fuel it. So do not sit back and wait for people to get aggressive. Irritate and infuriate them deliberately. Feeling cornered by a multitude of people who dislike you, you will fight like hell. Hatred is a powerful emotion. Remember, in any battle you are putting your name and reputation on the line. Your enemies will relish your failure. Use that pressure to make yourself fight harder. Keep yourself restless and unsatisfied. Napoleon had many qualities that made him perhaps history's greatest general, but the one that raised him to the heights and kept him there was his boundless energy. During campaigns, he worked 18 to 20-hour days. If necessary, he would go without sleep for several days. Yet sleeplessness rarely reduced his capacities. He would work in the bath, at the theater, during a dinner party. Keeping his eye on every detail of the war, he would ride endless miles on horseback without tiring or complaining. Certainly Napoleon had extraordinary endurance, but there was more to it than that. He never let himself rest, was never satisfied. In 1796, in his first real position of command, he led the French to a remarkable victory in Italy, then immediately went on another campaign, this time in Egypt. There, unhappy with the way the war was going, and with the lack of political power that he felt was cutting into his control over military affairs, he returned to France and conspired to become first consul. This achieved, he immediately set out on his second Italian campaign. And on he went, immersing himself in new wars, new challenges that required him to call on his limitless energy. If he did not meet the crisis, he would perish. When we are tired, it is often because we are bored. When no real challenge faces us, a mental and physical lethargy sets in. Sometimes death only comes from a lack of energy, Napoleon once said, and lack of energy comes from a lack of challenges, comes when we have taken on less than we are capable of. Take a risk, and your body and mind will respond with a rush of energy. Make risk a constant practice. Never let yourself settle down. Soon, living on death ground will become a kind of addiction. You won't be able to do without it. When soldiers survive a brush with death, they often feel an exhilaration that they want to have again. Life has more meaning in the face of death. The risks you keep taking the challenges you keep overcoming are like symbolic deaths that sharpen your appreciation of life. Reversal. If the feeling of having nothing to lose can propel you forward, it can do the same for others. You must avoid any conflict with people in this position. Maybe they are living in terrible conditions, or for whatever reason are suicidal. In any case, they are desperate, and desperate people will risk everything in a fight. This gives them a huge advantage. Already defeated by circumstances, they have nothing to lose. You do. Leave them alone. Conversely, attacking enemies when their morale is low gives you the advantage. Maybe they are fighting for a cause they know is unjust, or for a leader they do not respect. Find a way to lower their spirits even further. Troops with low morale are discouraged by the slightest setback. A show of force will crush their fighting spirit. Always try to lower the other side's sense of urgency. Make your enemies think they have all the time in the world. When you suddenly appear at their border, they are in a slumbering state and you will easily overrun them. While you are sharpening your fighting spirit, always do what you can to blunt theirs. Here are some further reflections on the death ground strategy. From Hernán Cortés, Conqueror of Mexico, by Salvador de Madariaga. Cortés ran all that aground with the 10 ships. Cuba, to be sure, was still there, in the blue sea, with its farms, its cows, and its tame Indians, but the way to Cuba was no longer through sunny blue waves, rocked in soft idleness, oblivious of danger and endeavor. It was through Motezuma's court, which had to be conquered by ruse, by force, or by both. Through a sea of warlike Indians who ate their prisoners and donned their skins as trophies. At the stroke of their chief's masterly hand, the 500 men had lost that flow of vital memories and hopes which linked up their souls with their mother island. At one stroke, their backs had been withered and had lost all sense of life. Henceforward, for them, all life was ahead, towards those forbidding peaks which rose gigantically on the horizon as if to bar all access to what was now not merely their ambition, but their only possible aim. Mexico, mysterious and powerful, behind the conflicting tribes. From Hagakure, the Book of the Samurai, by Yamamoto Tsunetomo. Meditation on inevitable death should be performed daily. Every day when one's body and mind are at peace, one should meditate upon being ripped apart by arrows, rifles, spears, and swords, being carried away by surging waves, being thrown into the midst of a great fire, being struck by lightning, being shaken to death by a great earthquake, falling from 1,000-foot cliffs, dying of disease, or committing seppuku at the death of one's master. And every day without fail, one should consider himself as dead. From Phantom Over Vietnam, by John Trotty, USMC. There is something in war that drives so deeply into you that death ceases to be the enemy, merely another participant in a game you don't wish to end. From Journey to Ixtlan, The Lessons of Don Juan, by Carlos Castaneda. You don't have time for this display, you fool, he said in a severe tone. This, whatever you're doing now, may be your last act on earth. It may very well be your last battle. There is no power which could guarantee that you are going to live one more minute. Acts have power, he said, especially when the person acting knows that those acts are his last battle. There is a strange consuming happiness in acting with the full knowledge that whatever one is doing may very well be one's last act on earth. I recommend that you reconsider your life and bring your acts into that light. Focus your attention on the link between you and your death without remorse or sadness or worrying. Focus your attention on the fact that you don't have time and let your acts flow accordingly. Let each of your acts be your last battle on earth. Only under those conditions will your acts have their rightful power. Otherwise, they will be, for as long as you live, the acts of a timid man. Is it so terrible to be a timid man? No, it isn't if you are going to be immortal. But if you are going to die, there is no time for timidity, simply because timidity makes you cling to something that exists only in your thoughts. It soothes you while everything is at a lull. But then the awesome, mysterious world will open its mouth for you, as it will open for every one of us, and then you will realize that your sure ways are not sure at all. Being timid prevents us from examining and exploiting our lot as men. From Hagakure, the Book of the Samurai, by Yamamoto Tsunetomo. Lord Naoshige said, "The way of the samurai is in desperateness. 10 men or more cannot kill such a man. Common sense will not accomplish great things. Simply become insane and desperate."
And that was the next part of Chapter 4, Create a Sense of Urgency, from the 33 Strategies of War by Robert Greene. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now a little bit of Maria Bartiromo.
Honestly would curl your hair. I mean, it's impossible. So it's a sort of confluence of events. Just kind of a side note on this, California's homelessness rate is 5 times that of Texas. Texas has an enormous migrant issue and is also a sunny place where people might want to go if they are homeless. So it is issue after issue. It is a policy decision, and the Democrats have to get their arms around it.
Well, I'm really glad you mentioned Texas. That was a great comparison, because a lot of people say, oh, well, the homelessness is higher in California because of the weather. Yeah. People can live outside. Well, how do you explain the comparison to Texas then, Liz?
Yeah, you can't. I mean, again,
exactly.
it's a deliberate slew of policies that enable people coming in and then have no ability to provide for them whatsoever.
So there we go. When she said they have no ability to provide for them whatsoever, they would have if they would have start with the status quo. What is the status quo with regards to the trespassers? Because they keep making the mistake of calling these folks homeless. They're not homeless. They are self-destructive individuals that would rather live under a bridge than save their money and pay for rent, because they'd rather buy their drugs, booze, whatever their addiction of choice is. They're self-destructive, and they're trespassers. So what do you do with trespassers? You tell them to leave. The police come out and say, you're trespassing. You got to get out of here. And if they don't want to leave, then they get cited. If they don't take care of the citation, they don't go to court, then a bench warrant is issued for them, and then they're arrested. That's the way you do it. And you do that until you can come up with, if you believe that there's a better answer or a better solution, then you go looking for better answers while you're getting rid of trespassers, because property rights matter. If you're squatting or trespassing on my property, I don't give a damn why. Get off. That's it. And so they need to be removed from the property, and if necessary, then they have to go to jail until you can figure out a better answer. But the left wants to start from scratch. They say, we're going to throw out what we normally do. We're not going to arrest. We're not going to cite. We're not going to do anything, and we're going to start from scratch. And every time you make decisions, when you start from scratch, you look for a perfect answer. And that's what the left in California and other places, but particularly in California with regard to homelessness, is doing. They're looking for perfect answers. This is why the homelessness problem, so-called homelessness problem, the trespasser problem goes on and on and on, because they come up with an idea. They have to have, of course, the consensus, the magic consensus. They have to have all the stakeholders come in and give their 2 cents worth. So if somebody says, well, we have buildings over here where we can house them, because again, just putting them in a shelter is not good enough. We have to have housing for them. So we have a housing over here, but that's not good enough either, because it doesn't have this, or it doesn't have that. It doesn't have a massage table, or it doesn't have 12-step treatments for their drug addiction or their alcoholism. It doesn't have psychologists or psychiatrists to help them with their psychological and psychiatric problems. And then somebody else is going to find something else that it doesn't have. So it never gets done. The list of requirements for new housing goes on. And with it, the price goes up and up and up. And this is why you hear about that the little housing that they do build is ridiculous in price, $700,000 per unit. And it's, again, perfection. This is what happens when you try to do things perfectly, when the perfect becomes the enemy of the good. The way we used to do things was good. If you want to improve it on the margins by trying to find a way to provide housing, and by the way, we already have a mechanism for that. It's called Section 8. The county has that, and not all counties have that kind of a program. So that's all you have to do. Get them off. If you need, get them off the street, put them into a shelter somewhere, and if you have to, then you create some kind of a tent city, if there's that many of them that you're overwhelming the shelters, until you can get Section 8, right? New laws, whatever it is that it takes to get these folks the Section 8 program. Then you don't have to spend $700,000 for new housing, per unit for new housing. But again, the point here is perfection. There's good enough and there's perfect. And when you do good enough, you get things done, you get it done on time, and you get it done under budget. But when you look for perfect, everything gets out of control. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now a little bit of Maria Bartiromo.
Welcome back. Now, the latest polls, President Biden's approval rating is sinking to an all-time new low.
Good.
The new Monmouth poll just out says 34% of voters approve of the job Biden is doing as president.
Too many.
Well, a full 61% said that they disapprove.
Good.
Vice President Kamala Harris's approval rating, meanwhile, inching above Biden's for the first time. She's at 35%. He's at 34%. This, as a new report reveals, President Biden and First Lady Jill Biden are frustrated by Joe's dismal poll numbers. The Washington Post is reporting that he gathered his closest aides before Thanksgiving and delivered some stern words for the small group assembled. His poll numbers were unacceptably low, and he wanted to know what his team and his campaign were doing about it. Quote,
well, it doesn't matter what they're doing about it. The question is, what's he doing about it? Is he getting ready to resign? Is he doing something to make himself healthier? Is he seeing a doctor? Because, again, he's sick. He doesn't deserve to get his party's nomination for President of the United States, and he doesn't deserve a second term as President of the United States. Forgetting everything else, all the policy issues, he doesn't deserve it because he is ill. It's time for him to retire, go home, take care of himself, and go from there. Back in a minute. Thank you. Again, a little bit more Maria Bartiromo.
give us your reaction to these sinking poll numbers.
Good to be with you. Well, they're based on reality.
So this is former Speaker of the House Newt Gingrich, former Georgia congressman, etc., and just all-around asshole. I don't care that he's a Republican. I don't care that he claims to be a conservative. He's an asshole. He was a great guy back in the 90s, and then he was Mr. Family Values. That was what the cultural campaign that he ran. Family values, family values, family values. Then we come to find out that not only was he cheating on his wife, but then he served her with divorce papers so he could marry his campaign secretary, because that was his habit. And that wasn't the first time. It was like the second time that he's done that. He had this nasty habit of cheating on his wives and then the only good thing about him as compared to Bill Clinton was that he married his mistakes. That's the way I like to put it. But he's just an asshole, and he'll always be an asshole, and that's just the way it is.
We just got a poll back at the America's New Majority Project. 76% of the country wants us to deal with the crisis at the border. 76%.
Wow, 76.
That means Democrats, Republicans, independents. Guess who's stopping it? It's Biden's immigration policy, Biden's illegal immigrants. You go to New York, where a 94-year-old Korean War veteran gets kicked out of his assisted living in order to turn it over to one of Biden's illegal immigrants. You look at the crime rate. Washington had its 900th carjacking on Thanksgiving Day. Every time you turn around, there's something that's just totally screwed up. And then you look at foreign policy. We've had over 100 attacks on American forces in the Middle East, and this administration is pathetic. You just covered earlier, and I listened very carefully, the whole problem with the Houthis. And that's entirely a problem of international navigation. And normally the U.S. Navy would put them down and protect the right of shipping. With this administration, you get nothing.
Another thing that's wrong with Mr. Gingrich is that he's not a Republican. He's a rhino, and he's a rhino because he is pro-abortion. He thinks there's some kind of moderate position on abortion. There isn't. You're either pro-abortion or you're anti-abortion, and he's pro-abortion. There's only one reason for a man to be pro-abortion, because they're pro-promiscuity, that they want to go out and get laid every weekend. And they want that safety valve, abortion as a safety valve, just in case. And that sucks.
So I think what you're seeing is, frankly, a nice old guy who's totally out of touch with reality, who blames everybody else, when the real problem is we are rejecting his ideology, his values, and his policies because of what they do to us. Because of what they do to the cost of living, to what they do to us in terms of safety, and I think that's going to continue.
Yeah, but why? I mean, I don't understand why he would ignore the wide open border. I don't understand why he would push this climate change agenda, knowing that it is hurting people who need oil and fossil fuels to run their businesses.
So what she's doing and may be doing here is not asking, when she says why, a policy answer. Something logical, linear, but she may be asking for a psychological analysis. And let's see how he answers it.
Then you've got the economic story. New Fox News poll says more voters feel like they've been hurt by Bidenomics rather than helped by it. 14% said that Biden's economic policies have helped versus 46% who say they've actually hurt them. Right. Nearly 80% of voters say that the economy is in bad shape.
Look, there's a classic example of where Biden doesn't understand anything about what Ronald Reagan did brilliantly and what Donald Trump does brilliantly. Why would you, when you know that you're getting those kind of numbers, why would you call it Bidenomics? He went around and made sure that we all understood this terrible economy is Joe Biden's economy. And then he wonders what's happening to his poll numbers. I think what you have is the hard left is essentially a religious movement. They believe in fantasies. I did a piece recently arguing that John Kerry is crazy, and I use that term. Crazy in the sense that he's out of touch with reality. You're seeing car dealers, I think 1,200 of them wrote the president and said, we can't sell the electric vehicles. And now you have an effort to mandate that you must buy it even if you don't want it. It's very hard to tell the American people to do things they don't want to do. A free people don't have to do things they don't want to do, and that's one of the core problems that Biden is facing.
Yeah, great point.
So he answered the question with a question. He ducked it. He didn't provide a rational answer. He didn't provide a psychological answer.
It's all around. We've got, meanwhile, a picture of President Trump soaring. A new Fox News poll shows former President Trump is dominating among so many groups, including young voters. He's got a 13-point lead on Joe Biden with voters under 30 years old. 41% of those voters say that they would vote for Trump in the general election. 28% they would vote for Biden. Newt, At this moment in time, 300 or so days before the next election, what do you make of these polls that have Trump dominating the field? I know Nikki Haley has been able to cut into some of that, but is she going to be able to take it from Trump?
Oh, no. I mean, first of all, she hasn't been able to cut into Trump at all. She's been.
So the question here is she's asking him to make a prediction. Will she be able to? The proper answer here is I don't make predictions unless I'm going to the track. But I'll tell you what should happen and then explain what should happen. Or if you don't know what should happen, tell us what you hope will happen. Let's see how he answers it.
We'll cut into DeSantis.
Right. Good point. Yes.
Essentially, what you have, Donald Trump's going to be the nominee. I don't see any way, and I saw Karl Rove the other day say he didn't believe it was possible to be this far ahead and lose the nomination. I think that's probably right. But here's what Trump has going for him that's amazing. People look back and they say overwhelmingly his policies were better for them than Biden. They look forward, and he's beginning to offer a very visionary future. I loved the speech he gave both in New Hampshire and in Nevada over the weekend, where he talked about saving America's cities. He talked about working with the Democrats. In fact, I just did a newsletter about how important I think it was to have a Republican embrace the cities and decide that saving America's cities really matters. Of course, Trump grew up in Queens, lived in Manhattan. He gets it. And I think that having him in a positive way talk about saving the cities is going to appeal to a lot of Democrats who are, again, you have Mayor Adams at 23% approval. Well, that says to me there's a potential market in New York City for Donald Trump.
Yeah, but Newt, what about these legal issues, okay? Can anybody really tell us what's going to happen here? You got Jack Smith.
So he responded by making the prediction. He said that Donald Trump was going to go ahead and be the nominee. And what he should have done was say what should have happened and say he should be the nominee. That's what I always say. He should be the nominee, and I explain why it is that he should be the nominee and why Joe Biden shouldn't be the nominee. Now she's following up, asking him to make another prediction.
Working overtime to put Trump on the stand on trial on March 4th.
Look, there's an entire wing of the Democratic Party that would like us to become Venezuela. You have a radical judge who openly hates Trump in charge of a trial in the District of Columbia where Trump got 5% of the vote. Now, does anybody seriously believe that he can get a fair trial in the District of Columbia? You have a rabid prosecutor who's doing everything he can to try to put Trump in jail. This doesn't look like the pursuit of justice. This is the replacement of the rule of law with the rule of power, and the American people know it. And I think when they get to really look at this trial and they get to look at how radical this judge is, Trump's just going to get stronger. He's not going to get weaker.
Yeah. Lee Carter, jump in.
So before I go ahead and leave this, I wanted to say that there's two things to every conversation, and that is, number one, what are they saying? And number two, what are they doing? Never forget to ask yourself, what are they doing? Are they asking for a prediction? Are they making a value statement? What are they doing? Because very often, if you ask yourself, what are they doing? That gives you a solution, especially when you're dealing with the left. You're at work and you're in the break room and you get some lefty that comes in there that wants to give you the business and asking yourself, what are they doing? Oh, they're trying to intimidate me. And once you understand what they're trying to do, then you're going to be less confused. And if you're less confused, you're going to be less fearful and you're going to be better able to handle the situation. Back in a minute. So thank you. Recruiting time. If you're a Democrat, you need to vote Republican. The Republican Party is better than the Democrat Party. The Republican Party is a party that is realistic, it is intelligent, and it is moral as compared to the Democrat Party. The motto of the Democrat Party as it stands now is might makes right and the ends justify the means. And that may sound good if you are myopic, but if you stop and think about it, you're going to realize that means that they can steamroll right over you and what you want and what you need in favor of their political priorities. So again, if you're a Democrat, you need to vote Republican. Be a Republican. Back in a minute. Thank you. A little bit more from the 5 o'clock news.
Amid a growing number of videos of brazen flash mob robberies at shopping centers, the state of California is trying to put a stop to it. Today, the new bipartisan California Assembly Select Committee on Retail Crime met for the first time in Sacramento, offering an open forum to identify policy solutions to the ongoing retail theft crisis.
And so this is an example. I'm playing this because this is an example of starting from scratch. There's no reason to have a select committee for this. It's simple. What you do is you start with the status quo and you ask yourself, what is it that we normally do? And then ask yourself, well, what's wrong with what we normally do? And normally we arrest these folks. Normally you would have security guards. The security guards would be allowed to take action either to prevent or to arrest the individuals. With Target, they have what they call loss prevention officers that they don't, by and large, they don't wear uniforms, and they watch people, and if they wait for them to leave Target with their merchandise without paying for it, and then they swarm on them, take them back inside, and then turn them over to the police department. So we could still do that. But the point is, if changes need to be made, that's where we need to start. Because once you start with the status quo, with the way we do things, and then try to make improvements, then you're being realistic. It's possible then to make the improvements, and we'll make those improvements in a timely fashion. What they're doing here is starting from scratch, meaning that they're going to go ahead and look for perfect answers, perfect solutions. They're going to invite in all the stakeholders, all the people they call stakeholders, because they're going to turn this into political action. It's democracy. We have to be democratic about it. We have to let everybody have their say. And so then they're going to have to try to create a consensus. And the odds that they're going to create a consensus around one particular idea is a long shot. And so since they're looking for something that is perfect, something that just doesn't exist, they're never going to come up with anything other than some useless report. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, the enemies of my country.
22. Cancer adjusted his steering around another pothole in the road, trying to minimize the truck cabin's nausea-inducing jostle that had characterized their entire drive to Supaya as he followed David's Land Cruiser. In the passenger seat, Nizar seemed unfazed by the rough ride. He was gazing out the window at the rocky desert around them, a landscape that seemed desolate and alien to Cancer. But for Nizar, this was home. Or at least, it would be until they made it out alive and he could move his family to America. If they made it out alive, that was. In the Godfather seat behind Nizar, Riley looked considerably less comfortable. He too was scanning the desert, one hand draped across his holstered pistol. But the team medic's expression, one of terse contemplation, was not due to the ride, but what he'd seen in the aftermath of the logistician's interrogation. Of all the kids in the team, Cancer thought, Riley was the most ill-equipped to deal with the sight. The plastic bag, the sight of a restrained prisoner who'd pissed himself before being shot in the head. Cancer glanced at the medic in the rearview mirror and asked, "You okay back there?" Riley said nothing. Returning his gaze to the road, Cancer dodged another pothole with a quick jerk of the steering wheel. As the oldest member of the team, Cancer had been raised by the old-school generation of warfighters. Those men treated the job like they were coal miners. When it comes time for your shift, you get down in the mine and you do the work. When you come out, you don't turn your job into some philosophical dissertation. You don't go talk to doctors to find out what's wrong with you. You don't talk to shrinks about your feelings. You drink, you go to sleep, you get up the next day to do it over again. Simple. But the younger generation of warfighters to which Riley belonged was another breed entirely. With their tortured morality and ever-expanding social consciousness, they seemed to be more anguished about their jobs with each passing day. It was exhausting. Still looking out the window, Riley said, "We don't know if his intelligence was credible. And either way, he didn't deserve to be tortured or executed. I agree with you on the execution part. After directing his efforts to facilitating the mass rape and execution of everyone outside his organization, I'd feel better if he spent a few decades rotting at some black site. But hey, look at the bright side. We don't have to haul his fat ass around the country with us." Cancer then looked to Nizar, sitting stoically in the passenger seat. "For someone who lives here, you're awfully quiet over there, pal." Nizar spoke calmly. "Elias lost his entire family to ISIS." Half looking over his shoulder to Riley, he continued, "If his pain was yours, you would do the same." "Exactly," Cancer chimed in. "But that does not make it right." Cancer rolled his eyes, giving an exaggerated sigh. Hey, is it too late to switch trucks? Because I'd rather be smoking with Elias, and I'm 100% fucking certain that David doesn't have a problem with any of this." In the rearview mirror, Cancer saw Riley looking away, out the window. Nothing needed to be said about the rest, that David's wife and daughter were in Charlottesville. And while Cancer was unburdened by the moralities that seemed to plague others he worked with, David had a dark side, a capacity for self-destruction that flared at certain points in the fight. Cancer had seen it while fighting alongside him as a mercenary in Argentina and during the team's first agency operation in the Philippines. Neither had anything to do with the man's family, which made Cancer inwardly eager to see what his team leader was capable of now. Cancer's train of thought was interrupted by Riley's voice. "I've been thinking about why Bari Khan might hit Charlottesville." Cancer replied, "So have I. And my only conclusion is that Charlottesville is too worthless for any self-respecting terrorist to hit." "That's exactly my point," Riley said. "That means there's got to be critical infrastructure in that area, and it's probably an electrical substation." "You think he's trying to shut down power?" Riley nodded. "My dad was a project manager for one of the largest power companies in the country. He had to deal with a blackout covering almost half of California because an electrical substation malfunctioned. And that was an accident. All BK would need to know is a little bit about the network structure. He picks the right substation and he could cause a cascading failure that's nearly impossible to stop." "What does that mean? Cascading failure?" "There's an initial failure when he takes out a substation. So the network rebalances the load, which causes a secondary failure. That starts a domino effect that continues until the entire network shuts down. And he wouldn't need all the rockets just to take down a substation. If I were him, I'd use some to hit the service center so the techs won't be able to fix what he's broken." Then he continued, "Bottom line, I'm telling you for a fact, he could take down the entire Atlantic grid if he hits the right spot. For all I know, there could be some really strategic substation in Charlottesville that would drop power across the U.S. Cancer found himself nodding slightly. Riley wasn't exactly going to split the atom anytime soon, but he had a good working theory if for no other reason than lack of options in that inbred backwater town that David called home. Nizar said, "I do not think so." "You don't think what?" Riley asked. "You say this terrorist is a mastermind," Nizar pointed out, "so there is no way he would allow his people to inform a mere logistician of his ultimate target." Cancer said, "Well, speaking as the only person in this car who was present at the time he leaked that key piece of information, I'll tell you for a fact the logistician was telling the truth." Nizar waved his hand as if dismissing Cancer's words as irrelevant. "I do not doubt what he told you," he continued. "What I am saying is he was deliberately misinformed. Whatever he told you is a diversion for the real attack. A large city, most likely." Riley sounded skeptical. "Then why wouldn't BK have given him a better alternative?" "There is no telling. But no brilliant terrorist would risk giving that information to a man who could share it if captured." Cancer intervened. "You forget all the bad guys trying to snatch him at the same time we were? If all he had was false information, they wouldn't have bothered." "I disagree." Before Cancer could respond, David's voice came over the radio. Truck 2, be advised, we have eyes on armed men in the road ahead. Looks like a checkpoint. Ian braked to a stop behind a civilian vehicle, scanning the single-file row of cars proceeding one at a time through the ISIS checkpoint. David leaned forward between the seats. How many guys can you make out? Looks like 5 or 6 total, but Ian angrily swatted at the pale cloud drifting in front of his face. Maybe I could see better if the cab wasn't filled with smoke. Elias threw up his hands, offended. America has the best tobacco in the world. How is that my fault? Ian didn't know who he was more pissed at. Elias for blissfully smoking cigarettes in the passenger seat, blowing smoke in his face and making his eyes sting, or David in the back seat for allowing it. David seemed almost nonchalant toward Elias since the former intelligence agent executed their prisoner, and Ian found that was perhaps the most troubling thing out of this entire situation. Ian could understand David's gratitude, sort of, but no matter the alleged target of the terrorist attack, they couldn't have a foreign national imparting his own agenda on the mission at hand. Every occupant of the lead truck was assessing the scene, evaluating their options as a single fighter leaned down to the driver's window of the lead vehicle, scanning and then questioning the occupants before waving the car past. There were now 5 vehicles between them and the checkpoint, which in Ian's mind left precious little time before their cover would be blown. The checkpoint wasn't a large affair. There was an ISIS pickup on either side of the road, and the one to the right had a fighter manning a vehicle-mounted medium machine gun. In addition to the man checking each vehicle, Ian counted another 4 men spread in a loose semicircle formation, facing the row of vehicles waiting for their turn. The problem wasn't the men he could see. It was the unknown number that he couldn't, with his view blocked by the vehicles ahead. Pulling his checkered keffiyeh scarf over his lower face, Ian heard David ask, Elias, can you talk our way out of this? No, Ian responded. Elias can't. I told you this would happen. As soon as BK learned the logistician was captured, he knew we'd be headed for Sepaya. This isn't some random checkpoint. It's a trap to find us. Then let's leverage that. How? We can discuss that later. First, we've got to negotiate this checkpoint. Am I correct in assuming if we turn around, they'll open fire and pursue? Elias blew another cloud of smoke and said, yes, that is accurate. Then David transmitted, we've got 1 guy questioning the drivers, another 4 spread out between 2 pickups, and a machine gunner on the right side truck. If they get a radio call out, I think it's fair to say we're fucked. Cancer replied, advise we let the other vehicles clear out. You can wait until that guard comes up to your window, then pop him in the face. Truck 1 dismounts and provides a base of fire. I'll bring Truck 2 online with your left flank and transition to a dismounted maneuver element. Sounds good, David said. Worthy will take the machine gunner. Everyone else shoot from your flank to center line. Questions? Just one, Cancer replied. Is your driver shitting his pants right now? David asked, Ian, Cancer wants to know if you're shitting your pants right now. The lead vehicle was waved past, leaving only 4 cars between them and the checkpoint. Ian said nothing, releasing the brake to follow the procession toward the enemy fighters. Then David transmitted, no, he seems pretty cool about the whole thing. Elias offered, I would love to help, but you took my gun. When I need a stationary target shot at point-blank range, I'll let you know. What do you mean, when? That time is now. He waved an index finger toward the windshield. These people are used to a terrorized populace. The man checking the vehicles is sticking his face right in the window. The lead car was waved past, and Ian eased the Land Cruiser forward. Only 4 vehicles to go. Finally, it was Worthy's turn to talk. I'll take him from the back seat. The hell you will, Ian blurted. You're not putting a rifle barrel across my face and pulling the trigger? No, I'm not. Because this situation has got pistol shot written all over it. Elias offered, you give me the pistol and I can take the shot. You're not taking the shot, I am. Ian, it'll behoove you to recline your seat just the slightest bit. Trying to be safe here. You can't be serious, David said. He sounds pretty serious. Ian's voice assumed a tinge of panic. Now you can't be serious, David. But David was silent, allowing Worthy to continue. And one more thing, Ian. I really can't stress this enough. Keep your big-ass brain against the headrest and don't move it until your face is covered in ISIS blood. What? Ian cried. Why would you phrase it like that? David, there's got to be another way to do this. Another car was waved through. 3 to go. David said coolly, "Worthy's in the best position to take the shot. I'd listen to what he's telling you." "And what am I supposed to do? Just smile and nod at the guy until he gets his face blown off?" "Pretty much," Worthy acknowledged. "But don't forget about reclining your seat. That part's fairly well critical to my whole process." Ian felt for a handle at his side, then pulled it and leaned his seat back. "Is this good?" "That's just fine," Worthy said. "More than enough for me to take the shot." Suddenly, there were only 2 cars remaining, and Ian rolled the Land Cruiser forward with a growing sense of tunnel vision. At least this would occur quickly. Only, it seemed it wouldn't. The driver currently being questioned was driving a covered pickup, and the ISIS fighter made him dismount and walk to the back to uncover his cargo. Initially relieved that action was imminent, this new wrinkle sent Ian's pulse racing as 100 possible contingencies flooded into his mind. David took advantage of the pause to chime in. "Hey, Ian, this is your time to shine. Say something really badass to the guy before Worthy puts a bullet through his head. Could boost your team rep. How about, 'Merry Christmas, motherfucker'?" Nizar offered. "Islamic State is for dogfuckers" would translate well. "Perhaps you should try that." Wait, Worthy said. "What about you grab your junk, then go, 'I got my license and registration right here,' and then I blow him away." David sounded excited. "I like that. Let's go with Worthy's idea." Then the covered pickup search was complete, and the truck rumbled off to allow the final civilian vehicle forward. The man approached the car to their front, leaning down to stick his face in the open window. Elias said, "Do not feel bad, Ian. This man is young. He probably has only 5 or 6 kids, all by rape of kidnapped young women." Ian couldn't reply, instead pulling his keffiyeh higher atop the bridge of his nose. The final car was a sedan, and Ian's assumption that the guard's questioning wouldn't take long was correct. Before he knew it, there was nothing between him and the ISIS fighters but a few meters of dirt road. Worthy spoke a calm, quiet reminder. "Back of your skull against the headrest, Ian, and keep it there." Ian complied, driving his head back into the cloth seat behind him with tense pressure. He regretted not reclining his seat any further, and now it was too late. The enemy fighter was pointing to Ian, then waving him forward. Ian let his foot off the brake, trying for a gentle push on the accelerator, but feeling the truck lurch forward uncomfortably before he braked to a stop again. He was breathing quickly, feeling his pulse soar. He got nervous when pulled over for a traffic stop in the States. This current arrangement was so far outside his comfort zone that he wanted to curl into a ball on the floorboard. The man approached, examining Ian with a frown, saying something in Arabic and motioning for him to pull down his scarf. Then he froze as his eyes swept over Elias and then the back seat before widening. Ian felt his breath hitch before blurting the only words that came to mind. "America says hello." The scalding blast of Worthy's pistol muzzle flared across Ian's face, along with hot blood splatter, and he opened his eyes to see the ISIS man falling toward him, mouth agape, a bullet hole in his upper lip. The body thumped against Ian's door, sliding out of view as David and Worthy leapt out of the truck. Cancer floored the accelerator before the man's body hit the ground, whipping the second truck to the left of the lead vehicle as he assessed the situation. Worthy and David were out of their truck and opening fire, and Cancer screeched to a halt beside their white Land Cruiser. Riley was dismounted and shooting by the time Cancer's feet hit the sand. Now the far left flank of this hasty battle formation, he immediately took aim on a man darting sideways, away from the battle. He could have been maneuvering to a more advantageous firing position, though from the looks of it, he was just trying to flee the scene and survive. But his intent made no difference to Cancer, who sent the man sprawling forward with 3 well-aimed shots before swinging his barrel toward the nearest ISIS truck. An enemy fighter scrambled behind the bumper before he could open fire. Cancer instinctively dropped to a knee, rolling onto his firing side and spreading his heels flat against the ground. Laying his rifle sideways atop his support hand, he oriented his line of sight between the enemy truck's tires until he identified the partial figure of a crouching man. Cancer fired 2 rounds, ejecting his brass into the ground and sending a stinging cloud of sand around his face. By the time he regained his sight picture, a wounded fighter was crashing to the dirt, and Cancer sent another 3 bullets sailing inches over the road. Blinking his vision clear from the sand, he saw the man splayed out, motionless, and scissored his legs beneath him as he fought his way back to a standing position. By then, the battle was in full swing, the chattering of unsuppressed enemy weapons barking from the right side of the objective. Seeing no further enemy at the pickup on the left, he took a bounding step toward the engine block, using it for cover as he assessed the locations of the surviving fighters. Cancer saw first that the machine gun on the right side pickup was unmanned and pointing upward on its pintle mount. Then he spotted David, Worthy, Ian, and Riley trading lead with a few remaining fighters who'd entrenched themselves amid a rock formation on the far flank. Without a clear line of sight, Cancer decided to maneuver to a more advantageous position, namely the ISIS truck to his front. From there, he could make his way toward the downed machine gun and open up a new flank of the fight as he established a crossfire with the rest of his team. He shouted a single word at Riley, "Moving!" and not knowing or caring whether his teammate heard, took off at a sprint toward the enemy vehicle. Granted, there was plenty of risk involved in this, starting with the possibility of surviving fighters engaging him from an unseen position. Cancer moved fast, prepared to slow to a shooting speed and engage any of the prostrate ISIS bodies before him. But none moved. As he skidded to a halt behind the pickup's protective cover, he saw the man he'd shot between the tires was still alive, breathing shallowly in what appeared to be the final moments of his life. Cancer hastened the process considerably, firing 2 suppressed rounds into the man's head. Then he executed a quick tactical reload, jamming a fresh magazine into his weapon and stuffing the partially expended one in his pocket. He was just about to transmit to his team to notify them that he'd be maneuvering to the next enemy truck with its unmanned machine gun before assisting in the fight against the remaining enemy when the previously silent machine gun suddenly roared to life. He tried to angle a line of sight toward the gunner, but the truck was positioned at a disadvantageous angle, and the gunner was being smart, Cancer noted. He was firing with his head and shoulders tucked low, concealed from Cancer's view and, due to his elevated position in the truck bed, likely from the view of his teammates scrambling for cover behind the team vehicles. For all his eagerness to oblige enemy fighters willing to die for their cause, Cancer viewed the battlefield like a pro basketball player looked at the court, and this intrepid gunner was almost single-handedly pinning down a team of 5 trained men. Cancer transmitted, "Net call, hold fire on the machine gun." "I got him." "Copy," David replied, adding sarcastically, "Take your time." Cancer took off at a run, carving a semicircle to the left before angling his path toward the remaining ISIS pickup's open tailgate. As he did so, the machine gun continued to rip long bursts of automatic fire, and Cancer didn't have to look right to know that his team's land cruisers were being turned into Swiss cheese. Judging by the rate of fire, the gunner wasn't particularly concerned with getting blasted from the front. For all the advantages of suppressors, there was one considerable drawback. The bad guys often didn't realize they were being shot at. And while that was great for maintaining the element of surprise, it was a massive problem when you were trying to keep the enemy's collective head down. Cancer was skidding to a halt behind the truck when the machine gun suddenly went silent and he ducked beneath the tailgate in anticipation of the gunner spinning around to shoot him. But the machine gun began firing again, the gunner probably long since deafened by the blasts. So far, so good, Cancer thought, as he oriented his weapon and rose from a kneeling position to get his first clear glimpse of the gunner, or rather, of his legs. Cancer took in the tantalizing sight of exposed hamstrings through his sights, and rather than waste precious moments in realigning for a kill shot, he stitched a short burst across the enemy fighter's rear thighs. He had a momentary view of bloody holes opening through the fatigue pants, and the man was a machine gunner no more. Instead, he fell to the truck bed like a puppet with the strings cut, screaming not in agony, but anger. The gunner's eyes found Cancer, transforming into a hateful glare as he began shouting in Arabic, his body sprawled atop a dead comrade who had initially manned the now silent machine gun. Cancer lowered his weapon, savoring this moment. He had to hand it to the guy. His chosen side in the Syrian civil war was probably the worst of many bad options, but for all the predatory cowardice with which ISIS operated, this man was fairly well a badass in Cancer's eyes. Not that it would matter for much longer, he thought. Because Cancer was going to end this fight on his own terms before anyone else arrived on the scene to debate him on it. Riley, being the delicate liberal snowflake that he was, would probably want to treat the wounded fighter with medical supplies they might need for their own team, then give the guy half his rations and a warm sponge bath. Cancer, however, had a different plan in mind. Reaching for the fighter's shirt with one hand, he dragged him backward out of the truck bed and flung him onto the dirt. He writhed in agony, grabbing at Cancer's left leg in an attempt to drag him down. Cancer smiled at the man's sheer audacity, then responded by planting the tip of his weapon into his neck. The suppressor was scalding hot, and it seared into the man's flesh with a sizzle as he cried out in pain. To his credit, he made a panicked reach for the gun, but Cancer's finger was on the trigger, letting the encounter proceed until its final ragged moment. He fired once, and the weapon thumped sharply in his grasp as a 5.56 millimeter round whipped through the man's jugular, sending a spray of dark arterial blood in a wide splatter. Finally, the downed gunner was still. "Clear," Cancer shouted, then transmitted for anyone who hadn't heard. "Machine gunner is down." Releasing his transmit switch, he heard David reply, "Thank God. Nice shooting, Cancer." Then he realized that the sounds of battle had ended altogether. There was no more gunfire, whether incoming or outgoing, and he quickly mounted the back of the truck. Placing a boot atop the chest of a dead fighter below him, he assumed a firing position over the roof, searching for targets amid the rock formations, and finding none. David, Worthy, and Ian were scrambling toward the rocks, fanning out to locate any surviving fighters while Cancer and Riley covered their movements. But no enemy reappeared, and Cancer heard the double whoofs of suppressed shots as the maneuver element dispatched any dead or wounded fighters they found. Within 30 seconds, David transmitted, "Objective is clear. We're heading back to the trucks." I keyed my mic and transmitted, "Raptor 9-1, this is Suicide Actual." Duchess replied, "Send your traffic. We just engaged an enemy checkpoint, 6 EKIA, conducting SE now." I sent a 10-digit grid location, then added, "We'll update when able." "Copy all," she transmitted back, sounding inconvenienced by my radio contact. I understood why when she continued, "Be advised, units are about to initiate raids in Sapaya. Expect to have cargo located within a few minutes. Be prepared for our on-order helicopter exfil." "Good news, we'll be ready. Suicide out." Turning toward the sound of footsteps jogging to a halt beside me, I saw Cancer's sweaty face looking resplendently at peace in the wake of a gunfight. "Hey, boss," he said, "the boys are almost done. What do you got?" "Duchess is running military raids in Sapaya, expects to find the rockets in a few minutes. We need to be ready for helicopter exfil, and if none of the vehicles are functional, it's going to mean a foot movement away from the road." "Hallelujah," he replied. "I'm ready to get out of this shithole." "Amen." Then Riley jogged back to us, a quiver of foreign assault rifles slung over his shoulder. "We're finished searching the bodies," he said, depositing his rifles on the ground. "Ian's got the intel." Ian wasn't far behind him, carrying a burlap sack as he called out, "Found a half-dozen cell phones and some handwritten notes. Nizar can translate to be sure, but everything looks like personal effects. Doubt we'll get anything useful out of it." Elias and Worthy arrived a moment later, returning from their vehicle assessment. Worthy announced, "Both our team vehicles are shot to shit." Elias nodded and sparked up a fresh Marlboro. "They are beyond all hope," he said sadly. "You can smell every type of engine fluid from 10 feet away. Even gasoline? Oh yes." He took another drag, exhaling smoke as he added, "Especially this." I raised an eyebrow. Then maybe smoking isn't the best idea. Elias looked at the cigarette in his hand with a renewed respect, as if the thought hadn't occurred to him until now. "Well," he shrugged, "this will be my last smoke until we are on our way again. The enemy vehicles are functional." I looked to Worthy, who gave me a short nod of confirmation. Then I turned to appraise the 2 ISIS pickups. They'd been dented and battered before our arrival, and courtesy of our brief engagement with the checkpoint personnel, were now pockmarked with bullet holes. But they were otherwise intact, each draped with a black flag bearing words that translated to "No God but Allah," and beneath them a white circle inscribed with "Muhammad is the messenger of God," all written in deliberately primitive-looking Arabic script, though it had been originally designed on an ISIS computer in 2007. What the hell, I thought. This made about as much sense as everything else on this mission so far. And after 13 hours on the ground in Syria, if we were about to move toward a helicopter extraction, it was far better to drive than walk. I announced, "Congratulations. We just became honorary members of ISIS." Cancer, as ever, translated my impulsive statement into an actionable order. Everyone but David and Elias, get to work transferring the fuel cans and equipment. We're on call for helicopter exfil, and I want us ready to move in 3 minutes, tops. They moved out to the team trucks, leaving me and Elias. I asked him, "You ready?" Elias nodded, leading the way to the ISIS truck with the machine gun mounted in the bed and a long-range radio antenna on the roof. Elias sat in the driver's seat while I stood beside the open door, watching. He reached for the radio console and found the hand mic. But instead of transmitting, he held his breath. And then, nothing happened. He just sat there, holding his breath until I rapped him on the shoulder. "You going to transmit, or is this some Syrian meditation technique?" Releasing his breath, Elias responded irritably, "I have listened to hundreds of radio transmissions from Islamic State. If there is a fight, they never speak calmly. Would you like me to do this thing, or do you want to find out how convincing your Arabic is to them?" I took a step away from him without another word. Elias exhaled, then postponed breathing until his face turned red. Once it had, he brought the mic to his face and began shouting. "Lakarasan ya ilam!" A voice responded in Arabic, the intonation of a question rounding the end of the sentence. "Arbet kafar, wa wahid, antazar?" He shouted a question in Arabic, releasing the transmit button mid-sentence, then resumed his radio conversation between gasping breaths. "Kumsat, kafar, wa Rasul Surian." Then he looked at me and said, "Have someone fire an ISIS weapon the next time I speak." Looking for the nearest team member, I found Riley hoisting 2 fuel cans as he shuffled toward us. "Doc," I called, "grab an AK and give some celebratory fire on my mark." Riley responded eagerly, setting down the fuel cans and retrieving one of his captured rifles before aiming it skyward. When Elias began speaking again, I gave Riley a thumbs up. He unleashed one long burst of automatic gunfire, then another. On the second volley, he added a shrill victory cry. Elias lowered the hand mic and shouted, "Enough! I cannot hear the response." "Sorry." Riley lowered the rifle barrel. "I'm starting to see why they do that. Felt pretty good, if I'm being honest." Ignoring him, Elias was squinting in concentration as he listened carefully to the voice speaking in an authoritative tone. Then he transmitted a final sentence before dropping the mic and looking to David. He said to load all the bodies and equipment for the purposes of propaganda, then to proceed to their location and rejoin the force. "In Sapaya?" David asked. "No." Elias shook his head. "In a town called Ibrahim Kel."
And that was that's chapter 22 of The Enemies of My Country by Jason Casper. Back in a minute. Thank you. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States. Today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there, and reminding you to be honest, smart, and beautiful, and remember that the left has no authority, no power, and they can't win.